All right, and my name is Karim El-Bayar. I am the program coordinator for the Connecting Business Initiative. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. We have a really excellent panel and discussion planned. I'd like to thank PeaceNexus Foundation for partnering with us on this webinar, and of course our colleagues at UNDP, OCHA, APAD Sri Lanka, and PDRF, and we will be introducing them in just a moment. Before we go into the substance of this session, a few housekeeping notes. First, there is a question and answer box in Zoom. I encourage you to use that box to ask any questions you may have throughout the presentation. Others can see your questions and can upvote. You can just put the thumbs up on a question if you like it. We will try to get to the questions that have the most votes when we get to the Q&A part of our discussion. We also have a chat function in Zoom, which you can feel free to make use of to speak with one another, to introduce yourselves. So we're very much looking forward to a rich discussion with the panelists and with all of the attendees. And thank you to the attendees who've taken the time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. Our agenda for today, we're going to have some opening remarks. I'm doing that right now. And then we'll have a brief overview of conflict sensitivity, what the concept is and what it means, from Katrina Gourlay. She's the executive director of the PeaceNexus Foundation. We're very pleased she's with us today. We'll then go into a panel discussion on how private sector organizations, businesses can embed conflict sensitivity in practice. And for that, we're going to have Katrina Espuria, who is the Special Projects Program Manager from the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. We're very pleased to have her with us today. And Farzan or Hush Hashim, who is the country director of the Asia Pacific Alliance for Disaster Management in Sri Lanka. Thank you both for joining us. And Gregory Connor, who is a policy specialist on conflict prevention, peace building, and responsive institutions in the Crisis Bureau at the United Nations Development Program. This panel discussion will be moderated by Tina Miley, who is our conflict sensitivity specialist here at CBI. Following that, we have reserved 10 minutes for Q&A. And then brief closing remarks. So without further ado, I would like that we just jump right into it. I will say just at the outset that conflict sensitivity is something that is extremely important for all of us to be thinking about as the private sector plays a greater role in humanitarian response, recovery, and planning. It's very important that we make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences. And so without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into the panel discussion, but we are very pleased to have this and we will continue as we go through. So Katrina, over to you, please.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to join you. And I've been delighted to be part of this partnership. And part of the reason for the background of that is that we work with both multi-mandate development humanitarian organizations, but also businesses in supporting them in their quest to be more conflict sensitive. So maybe we can go to the first slide. My role here is just to introduce the concept and how it's relevant to disaster management, but also businesses in general. So the concept is in essence extremely simple. It's about understanding the context in which you operate, step one, and how your operations impact that context and vice versa, step two, and crucially, most difficult thing, acting upon this understanding preemptively to minimize negative impacts and also to ensure that your actions seize opportunities to also enhance positive social impacts. So when we talk to businesses about why they're interested in this, and not just businesses, all actors, it's really to prevent unintentional harm in terms of social tensions, and be good at risk management and risk mitigation. And in fact, that's when you look at why companies are taking social elements seriously, it's often about that. And thirdly, we realize that it can do more than that. It can actually bring groups together, resolve certain social tensions if done well. Next slide. What we mean by conflict sensitivity, I would say, I just want to dispel that it's not just about doing no harm. I mean, that is what everybody would attempt to do, and that is not easy, but most organizations, and this goes for the businesses that we've worked with, including large multinationals, they also want to, they have some social purpose. So they want to at least contribute within their mandate as much as possible to some social outcomes. So conflict sensitivity spans both do no harm and contributing to social cohesion. And in some cases, it can also directly address the drivers of a conflict, so-called peace building. I just want to add that when we have had our partnerships with various businesses, what they stress is often a different rationale, which is that it literally reduces disruptions to some of their operations. And what has surprised us is they feel that this work is also motivating for their staff, and one of the reasons they really invest in it. And often they use some of the outcomes both to show that they are for investment purposes and also marketing opportunities. For example, we have a partnership with a coffee manufacturer who tells stories of their work in some fragile contexts as part of their marketing. So it can be useful for business too. Next. So as is outlined in the excellent guidance that the CBI has already developed on this, there are three main steps in conflict sensitivity, as I've also just mentioned above. I just want to briefly talk about the first step now, which is the context analysis, also called conflict analysis if you're focusing on that. Essentially, it's about looking at the key social issues that are in play in the area and the actors relating to it. And when I just want to add, in this deep blue section of the slide, there's a mention of dividers and connectors. Often it's being aware of how to engage with those that have a sort of social connection function, and also be aware of those that are excluded in the social fabric. So there's a lot of analysis about the different groups and how your intervention can build on connections and mitigate the risk of divisions. And all I want to say is that most of you, we already know, and you'll hear how from your panelists are already doing this. It's often informal, this kind of analysis. Although it can be, as a formal analysis paper, and it can be institutionalized within the project cycle, but it takes very many different forms, and they need to be fit for purpose for whether it's for project planning or program planning or even more strategy. Move on, sorry. So I just want to give an example to disarm a bit about how it doesn't need to be difficult. So here is just one example of a tool that is used to understand what your potential impact is of your operations. And it's just a 4W1H tool, which means you have to look into the potential impact, both positive and negative, of the project objectives, and specifically where you're going to be focusing, and with who are going to be the beneficiaries, who wins and who loses, what's the impact of that. And the what is also how, the what the activities, but also how you do it is crucial. And to elaborate a little bit more, I'll go into that. But all I want to say with this tool is it doesn't need to be a heavy process. It's important just to do the thinking of what are the possible consequences early on and repeatedly in the process. So maybe we can elaborate in the next slides. Next slide, sorry. So this is just, there are three dimensions that you can look into when you're looking at your potential impact. One is, what is the impact? This is just what you're doing, and often you're transferring resources. I mean, that's the nature of your work. So obviously there are risks. Obviously you want to reduce the risks of corruption or diversion, but also consider, and I'm just taking one here, legitimization effect. So whether you decide to work through the government in a situation like Myanmar right now, where that is contested in itself, will have an impact. So just working out what the impact of that, your choices in how you distribute resources is an essential part of it. So next slide. And there are a range of ethical considerations in terms of how you operate as well. So for example, are you being transparent about how you make decisions in where you're providing aid? Is that consulted? Are you setting a good example in terms of being accountable also to your beneficiaries with some mechanisms you put in place? Are you sending unintentional messages about who you contract or partner with? Is it just associated with one side in a conflict or not? There are many aspects to it, but it's an important part of the process. And the last one. And then I also think that it is also relevant at an organizational level, not just a project or program one. So what is your staff composition? What messages does that send? Are your staff empowered to change the project if they realize it's going to have some unintended consequences or is a big, risk of doing so? Are they communicating in the appropriate languages? How does that impact how that you're perceived? These are just more examples. And to conclude, I think, yes. So what I want to say is that there are a number of questions in this process, and they are all questions that anybody that wants to behave responsibly in a fragile place will need to answer. But I want to say that it doesn't need to be too complicated. What's important is to sort of institutionalize this way of thinking in your organizational culture. And that is what is involved in that is building it in how you already do your planning and monitoring, and keep it simple so that it can be an easy integration process. So there are simple tools that don't require drafting long papers, for example. And then I think to keep it live within your networks and your organization, there is some element of making people responsible. I think that gets things going. So it's good to have focal points or advisors that people can turn to. And likewise, to keep the energy going, sharing experience with people that are having challenges on this is often very useful. And as I said before, to incentivize that it's okay to change a plan or adapt something if you've got feedback that it might be risky. So rewarding the actions taken as a result of this analysis or adaptation along the way. And finally, celebrate. There is a lot that can be achieved that wasn't even anticipated in an initial plan. And so if you can share your stories of how your relief work or disaster management work really also contributed to shifting patterns of, or improving social cohesion, that has a reinforcing kind of motivational loop and is a sign of it really being embedded. And with that, I want to hand over to your colleagues who already have lots of examples to share and to continue on this mission. And I hope I wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, for that really excellent introduction to what can be a complicated topic, but I think you've really simplified it very nicely. I see we have a number of participants in the room, many of whom are from the Connecting Business Initiatives member networks, but others who are from other companies that are either companies that are members of the CBI members or just other companies that saw and heard about this event. And so for all of you, we will be sharing these slides. We will be providing these types of tools if it would be helpful so that you can think through conflict sensitivity in your own practice. We know certainly for CBI member networks, they play an important role already in emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. Many of them have organized simulation exercises, shared early warning messages, collected and distributed food and other items, and helped rebuild critical infrastructure. So these are really important topics for us to be considering and thinking about, not just in fragile or volatile environments, but really anywhere we work. And as you very adeptly highlighted, Katrina, all organizations have a responsibility to ensure that their disaster management programming before, during, and after disasters is conflict sensitive. I'm very pleased now to turn it over to our panelists who were going to give us some examples from their own work and how they've been able to do this, how they've been able to integrate conflict sensitivity into their work. And so, without further ado, let me pass it over to you, Tina. Actually, I should just quickly put up your faces here on the screen so everybody can have a sense of who our panelists are today. Katrina Espuria, Gregory Connor, and Farzan or Hush Hashim. Tina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kareem and Katrina. Now that we really have gotten a very good overview of conflict sensitivity, what it means, it's time to explore what its implementation looks like in practice. And as Katrina pointed out, you could argue that the concept itself is rather simple, but of course it doesn't mean that integrating it into disaster management programming would necessarily always be easy. But in the next 30 minutes, our panelists will share interesting insights, also lessons learned, that will hopefully help all of you, all of the participants on this webinar, to turn words into action. So we have a great lineup of speakers. Thank you so much, Trina, Greg, and Hush for having joined the webinar today. Let's start by talking a little bit about the first step on understanding the context. And first, Gregory, I'd love to ask you, you have experience working in and on several challenging contexts. And from what you have seen, how can the private sector gain, let's say, sufficient insights to inform their work, including their disaster management interventions?
Thank you very much for the question, Tina, and thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and thank you for this.
Gregory, I think you are frozen. At least on my screen, I see other people moving, but I cannot hear or see you. Greg, I hope you can hear us. Maybe I will just, we'll come back to you, Gregory. I hope Hush and Trina, you can still hear me. I see your heads moving, so I assume we're okay. So we'll just come back to Gregory when his connection is stable. But maybe Trina, I mean, I would have, of course, loved to have heard you reflect also on what Gregory is saying, but maybe we can start by looking at PDRF. PDRF's first engagement in a conflict-affected area was after the conflict in Zamboanga City in 2013, and then 4 years later, when you started several projects in Marawi City. And it would be really interesting to understand, how was your approach different in these contexts than in the more, let's say, typical contexts where you normally operate, i.e. those affected by natural hazards? So what elements did you consider when you started your operations in these areas?
Thanks, Tina, and thanks, CBI, for having us again. There's also a storm here right now, so hopefully my internet keeps up. So in Zamboanga, the expectations were already set for us. So the location is identified, the project is also identified. All we needed to do was really coordinate with our partners to implement the project. On the other hand, in Marawi, also in the south of the Philippines, after a 5-month-long battle that flattened the city, we had the opportunity to develop our own programs. But given the context that it's a conflict-affected region with different religions or also groups to be considered, we had to make necessary adjustments for it. For that to happen, we sent a team to Marawi. We set up our satellite office there. And as you mentioned, on top of the usual damages and needs assessment that we do for natural hazards, we sort of adopted and simplified the do no harm framework. But in a manner that it's more digestible and practical for us and our partners. So there is the connectors and dividers analysis in that framework. And for us, it's as simple as asking it what factors can contribute to tension, and that what factors can also contribute to making them work together or connect them with each other. So in the context of Marawi, as simple as beneficiary selection can cause tension for them. But the shared experience of war and also wanting peace is something that connects them all. So for us, we were able to use those information that later on when we develop our programs, we can already pan it out in our heads, like this would be more appropriate, this would cause more harm than good. And it's and the framework itself or the analysis itself is sort of like a guidance for us that we have to go back to it at a certain period of time. So you don't like implement it and then go back to it when it's done. So we monitor the projects either quarterly, or for us, we did it even monthly, to see if it's working out for them. So we had several experiences where we had to change up a bit our project implementation because our project is doing more harm than good. And so I think that is the opportunity that we had in Marawi that we didn't have in the Zamboanga case.
Thanks so much, Trina. Very helpful to know, and definitely a good or a best practice for other CBI member networks to also adopt this, to have a framework in place, even if a more kind of simplified version of what are the things that you need to check before you start planning for your interventions, so you're not doing harm. So the tensions, potential drivers of tension, but then also what can bring people together. Thank you so much for sharing that. Greg, now that you're back online, I want to just give the floor back to you so you can talk a little bit about how the private sector can, in fact, gain sufficient insights. Trina already gave one excellent example of how they actually went and did that kind of light analysis. But from your experience, what have you seen? How can the private sector gain insights to inform their disaster management interventions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tina, and apologies for that. It looks like I dropped out for a minute, but it's great to hear these reflections from the Philippines, and I think they very much resonate with what I was mentioning about the importance of understanding the context. And I really think that it's in that direction that the private sector can gain sufficient insights to inform disaster management interventions. So we know that in all contexts, contextual insight is absolutely critical to the success of an intervention. But I can say that in crisis contexts, it's especially important. And we know that in those types of contexts, there's a heightened level of risk. And so for that reason, we can understand that failing to adopt a conflict-sensitive approach can really put communities at risk. And it can also reverse the impact that was the reason for us to engage in the first place. So what does that mean for private sector networks? I think it means that you need to consider within your own operations as a network, but also of your member companies, your interaction within that context. And we, in our guidance, have spoken about one negative example that is pretty general, and I think it could be applied to many different contexts, and that is around livelihood assistance. I think many of you have probably already engaged on this type of aid in your work, and we often see that whether it's because of a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, that people can become displaced, and we often overlook the poverty and the unemployment and the other socioeconomic concerns that communities who have not been displaced around them face. And so in terms of the operations of a member company or the network itself, if those factors are not addressed, we have a real potential to drive instability, even if it's unintentional. And this example, Tina, really resonates with me, and I was happy to hear Katrina earlier talk about the distribution effects, because in my own experience working in Central Africa, I saw that aid that was meant to support refugees from the Central African Republic in an underdeveloped region across the border from CAR had really just increased tensions between what initially were generous host communities and those refugees who had been given priority in this assistance. And many of the refugees had been provided with livelihoods training by the private sector, some of them in small scale agriculture, but they didn't have any land of their own, and their role as agriculturalists came into conflict with local pastoralists, but also with landowners, so other agriculturalists who were living in their villages. So what we saw was that initially something that was seen as doing good created a problem. And I thought that I would provide this reflection really as a positive example, because we saw that we needed to take action before this could become any more exacerbated. And that was that we recognized that it took much of a larger part of community to address these issues and to identify ways to make livelihoods more effective. And that really included addressing social cohesion, and also including ultimately host communities in aid programs and in their planning processes. Thanks very much again for the invitation to speak today.
Thank you, Gregory. Hush, of course, now that Trina and Gregory have provided these examples, we also want to hear from Sri Lanka. The context in Sri Lanka is extremely interesting. It's known for its diversity. And of course, that's a huge richness for the country, but at least in the past has also been a source of tension. So can you please share with us how APAD Sri Lanka has taken the context into consideration when designing and implementing interventions in the past?
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for the opportunity again, CBI. See, basically diversity certainly has been our hallmark. And if you also see why we have so many tourists coming here, and we have been voted the best best country to visit under the for tourists as well. So, but it also has its negative sides of it. But if you see the landmass of Sri Lanka, which has 62,000 square kilometers, you have nearly or over 21 million people and around 8 ethnic groups. So within this, in an island, we would have quite a lot of opportunities as well. But in terms of the unfortunate incidents that we have had, which also led to complex emergency ones and the flashpoints that we have had, these are issues which need to be considered. And this is what we as a CBI network look to in working with the private sector. In terms of dealing with the private sector, we advocate for obviously tolerance, reducing risks, and of course highlighting the opportunities. And being sensitive is one of the key areas that we advocate for. It also could be in terms of awareness, even if they are not, we make it a point that we create that awareness for them and provide that assistance. See, when they are operating in a particular area, we talk about choosing a geographic area. Within that geographic area also, we look for geographic communities. Then the context, the local context, whether it is political, whether it is socio-economic, whether it is cultural. And the issues related to marginalization in that community, who are marginalized, how would you approach them? So these are areas that we would look into. But one of the key areas here is the religion aspect itself. During a crisis, and especially in a conflict setting, the religion is foremost to everybody. And how you would ensure that the religion, the practices are respected, and also how you would be very sensitive to that. Gender dynamics, I think that is key again in Sri Lanka, where you have the ratio of about 92 males per 100 females, and females are more. And how would you take that into consideration in your intervention with the community as well? Recently also, we, with regards to the COVID-19, the stigma related to that. So that is something we addressed, and we also worked with the government and ensured that the private sector was also aware with that. So promoting ethical media, that is another advocacy that we do, and we have implemented so many programs as well. Then even if you look at the gender dynamics again, see, Sri Lanka is very culturally sensitive. And you would see during search and rescue operations, during the floods and so on, women would like to be saved by women. So we also brought this into the context of training women as search and rescue experts. So these are areas that we look at, but finally, it is about encouraging corporates to have such mandates of inclusivity. So as the previous speakers spoke, how best we can institutionalize this within these corporates. Yeah.
Thanks, Harsh. And I'll let you actually continue. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but if briefly, you mentioned already the religious and gender aspect in search and rescue operations, how you have now realized that it's important to make sure that there are women in search and rescue teams. But could you also give us another concrete example on how you have either designed or improved the design of a recent intervention with the private sector to ensure that you would do no harm or even potentially have a more kind of positive stabilizing effect? If one example briefly, I think that would be very helpful to understand, because it's really great what you're saying about, you know, ethnicity, language, religion, all of these factors being so important in the context in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, yes, Tina. I think one of the recent interventions that we did, that was whilst we were amidst a lockdown, COVID pandemic lockdown, we also had the floods coming in. So the government also needed quite a lot of assistance. And when one of our corporate members, in fact, the name is Union Assurance, and they came forward and said, look, we would want to support the government or in areas where we can support the guys who are affected by flood. But then it was extremely challenging at that time because they wanted to do something, but how best we can support that. So we had to take into context, one, where is actually the support needed? Two, how can they operate within the environment, that is, there's a lockdown, there's a curfew, and third, the security of the people, that is the community as well as the the corporate members who were going in for support under the health guidelines as well as the other security. So what we did was, again, the geography, where the main event was when, because in Sri Lanka we have the religious days, auspicious days, in terms of where in that particular day there will be a particular community which will not be consuming meat. So is the food, that is, they wanted to provide meals for the displaced people, but then we were looking at whether the food will be appropriate to the people who would consume on that particular day. Second, religious practices, again, whether the food was in line with different religious communities. Yes, it was, because we figured out from where the food came, and we knew that could be consumed by any ethnicity or any religious factions or the people from relevant backgrounds. So again, that was ticked off. Then the other that we also were looking at is, see, during a crisis where livelihood was a concern for the people there, when these people would go in and provide those assistance, the security of the staff, how can we do that? So we linked up with the military, we linked up with the local police, we linked up the disaster management center and arranged for that. So in arranging that, these are the areas that we would look into to ensure that there is no harm done, to ensure that even when you go there, everything is in place in terms of finding the beneficiaries, providing them with the tokens, ensuring the military or the police or the local government authorities are in place. And when we did this, it was actually very easy to follow the guidelines as well as the implementation process. Simple things like getting the authority, the curfew pass for the corporate members to move on that particular day, about how many hours can they move in. So there's so much of things to look into when you coordinate and facilitate these private sector members in support of these responses. So it's very tricky, but I think we have got used to that. And this is why the CBI network platform has that experience and know how to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Harsh. It's obvious that one of the biggest challenges in integrating conflict sensitivity is really to know how you should adjust your operations based on the information that you have gathered, and where do you even start. So that's really helpful to know. Trina, could you also provide an example of how you have adjusted one of your projects in Marawi City, maybe in particular, to ensure that the private sector actions would not aggravate the situation that is already very sensitive?
Yeah, sure. So I think this could be a rejoinder to what Gregory mentioned earlier in developing livelihood projects. So what I could share would be our Weaving Hope in Marawi project, which is a livelihood program supporting women weavers to economically recover from the impacts of the siege. So let's just note that these weavers are informal in a way, or even micro entrepreneurs, but they don't have a standard price points for their products or would follow a certain business model. So after the siege, the thought of providing support is deemed as doing good. Um, so in the initial stage, just providing that support should already be enough for our partners or for PDRF. But using the framework or the analysis that I earlier mentioned, um, we tried and also tailor it to the context of these women. So they're from different religions or from different ethnic groups. So at one point there could be some tension between them. So the project aims to provide them tools. That would be the weaving looms, the thread, the access to markets, and all the products that they will be producing will be bought by the organization. So in the initial stages of the project, that went well. But after the first phase of our monitoring, we've received already concerns of another weaving group or one women group feeling that the other one is getting more from us or being prioritized by us compared to another. So for us, that's already a brewing tension. Um, that if we go back to the framework or to the analysis, could already be a trigger. Should we do something about it? Should we leave it as it is? So for us, our solution is very simple. So we just met with them and we tried to understand what would be the root cause of it. And that's something that we didn't put focus on in the beginning of the planning stage, understanding that they are informal and that they don't have any price points in place or following a certain business model, that could be the root cause of all of this. Because one person is selling the product at a different price point compared to another, therefore she's getting more. Um, so going back to the framework, our decision was to iterate it, to change it, and add another layer of activity. So this one is wherein we already brought in textile experts to explain to them that the prices could vary and change because some designs are more intricate. Some designs use cotton and some use silk. So the value of it increases or decreases based on the material. We also tap the local academic institution in Mindanao to help us develop a financial literacy program for all of these women. So they already know this is a grant, but they have to understand how can they earn from it once we hand over all the knowledge to them so that they can continuously operate their business. So we also provided them like branding and design, mentorship, and also brought them to local, regional, and even national trade fairs. So they see what opportunities they have, and then at the same time also trigger in them what could be or what could they do more in terms of quality or opportunities that they can improve so that they can elevate their products and bring it to that level. So I'm happy to share that we supported 5 women groups, a total of 100 women weavers, and all of them made partnerships here in Metro Manila and also in some areas. So some of them are supplying to famous designers in Manila, one of which is also providing textile to the Office of the Vice President. The rest are also supplying masks made of weaves to USAID. So So should we have not addressed that inconvenience at the beginning, I think the outcome could have been different. So I think that's also one example of how the framework has helped us in project implementation.
Thanks, Trina. Seems quite obvious why this was super important, but also how you very well managed to kind of solve an issue that could have led to something negative. So I really appreciate that example, the insights. Thank you so much. Now we've heard examples, we've heard the rationale, but I think even in our audience today, there might still be some private sector representatives who are maybe not totally convinced, or they're still hesitating in terms of incorporating conflict sensitivity into their disaster management operations. So very briefly, and maybe starting with Gregory, why do you think that is? And what can we collectively do about it?
That's a great question, Tina, and thank you so much. I think, I also want to reflect upon what we just heard from Trina and Hush. And so there's a lot going on as well. And so I wonder if I might not call it hesitancy as much as missed opportunity to connect the dots. Because when we think about it, the private sector really shares a common aim of reducing risks. And usually there is an appetite to avoid doing harm. But I think it's the case that private sector entities are not always networked with local stakeholders in the right way. And then we, as the international community, are not always networked with the private sector entities in the way that we should be. So that means that, in my opinion, there are missed opportunities for common analysis and assessments, including on the type that we just heard about in terms of political economy and conflict analysis. And I think that the nature of our work leads us sometimes to simply think about the operations and not about the context. And when there are multiple actors, I think, one metaphor I might give is that we're planting a tree and we're watching it grow, but we're not aware of everything that's happening around us. So I really believe that it takes a joined up approach in order for us to see the forest from the trees. And that is really the only way that we can be effective in terms of seeing the entire risk landscape.
Thanks, Gregory. Definitely a great way to think about it, not as hesitancy, but as a missed opportunity to connect the dots and making sure that we work together with different stakeholders. Hush, what would you say? What might be some of the reasons, and how can we overcome those potential hesitations, barriers, or missed opportunities?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Gregory. It's not to say that the private sector don't, but I think they might see this in terms of a burden or additional costs involved if you do introduce it as conflict sensitivity. The other is maybe they lack expert, and we don't want them to opt out because of these reasons, because we know that if they feel that they would do more harm, it will affect their brand image and they would try to opt out. So I think it is our duty to ensure that they are part of it. And again, as Gregory mentioned, NGOs with expertise in conflict sensitivity take a confrontational stance against the private sector during a crisis. So I think there is also this issue about the CS experts from the NGOs not wanting to work with the private sectors. That is something we should encourage for them to work and provide that expertise. Okay, what can we do about it? I mean, I think there's so much that we could do. Private sector plays a key role, whether it is in response, recovery, development. See, if it is conflict, post-conflict recovery, reconstruction, development, you need the private sector. Private sector would come in to provide, basically repair the roads, reconstruction activities, the infrastructure. So it's a private sector which will be involved. So here again, we need to understand how we can make certain things mandatory. it is always the donors who would be coming forward, whether it is the larger donors or otherwise, and the government. So let us make the private sector who is engaging in these post-conflict activities, infrastructural activities, or it can be even during a cessation of hostilities where they would come in and do something to ensure that the people get something back better. So in that context, what we need to do is how can we introduce these guidelines? These guidelines can be conflict sensitivity guidelines in private sector development, or you can also talk about how we can integrate peace building into what they are doing. How can the nexus be created by the peace builders with the private sector or private sector organizations who will be working in that context? So there is so much that we could do. Another way to look at is how can we integrate what CES into already what they have, whether it is the due diligence that they have within the companies, whether it is the fair trade that they would have. It could also be to look at integrate peace building as well, look at a conflict lens to how they work to ensure that in cases of gender, whether it is human rights, how they could be added on. So I feel there's so much that they can do, even if you take the ethical decision-making process. How can we include CS into that? So like we promote in terms of DRR to institutionalize their day-to-day activities, why not promote CS as well? Then lastly, what about looking at the SDGs? SDG 8, SDG 16, how can we incorporate that and say that this is a mandatory requirement that you got to do? So that's the way that you could include all these activities into them for them to follow and be a part of it.
Thank you, Hush. In the interest of time, Trina, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think, well, Gregory and Hush has covered most of it, but what I would want to share is based from our experience. In all of our programs in Marawi, a lot of our partners have been hesitant at first. So I think it was touched on earlier already, the additional cost that it would entail. Changing a project objective in the middle of an implementation would have additional cost and would also have like time required to it, because you have to extend it and change your schedule totally. And then on the planning stage, the additional questions actually for us only, well, it's not a disruptive time frame, so to speak, but it would have time requirements. And I think it would also sum up that you need to have tools and trained personnel to conduct it. That's why our approach into solving that was really trying to simplifying it. We're lucky that we are part of CBI, and we helped CBI in the rollout of the guidance toolkit in engaging companies in man-made disasters in 2018. So we had this session with almost 70 of our private sector partners, where we identified already like what would be their concerns, and what would be the clear entry points for them to engage in such a scenario or an activity. So there, I think one of the results to that is just simplifying it, simplifying what the context is, um, the meaning, or what is the relevance of it for the private sector. Because sometimes the language of the development world is totally different to the language of the business world. So it's not about the hesitancy. It's just the interplay between the words that we're using. So from our end, simplifying it to more practical terms, like you use dividers and connectors, then we use what factors can cause tension and what factors can connect a group. It's the same thing, but for us, it's something digestible. So I think that's one way to cross the bridge, so that we can have more private sector groups to try and implement projects using this framework. And I think it's not only limited also to conflict sensitivity, because we've tried applying it also to another region affected by typhoons, and it perfectly works well. Having programs with more positive impact and being able to iterate in the middle of a project implementation to make sure that we're on the right track and we're doing more good than harm. Back to you.
Thanks, Trina. Very helpful. And indeed, I think we all agree that the CBI member networks themselves can help the private sector digest what all of this means in practice. And here we have two good examples of how it's already being done. So whether it's in terms of kind of translating using the right language or it's simplifying the process, but that's what you're there to do so that it will be easier for your private sector members, but also, of course, your other stakeholders. We have two questions in the Q&A box, and I definitely want us to get to those as well. But before we do, maybe if we take 1 minute each to just really highlight one or two main lessons that you have learned that you think will help the audience in their future disaster management interventions. So in 1 or 2 sentences, what are the 2 things that you would like the audience to take from this conversation today? Let's start with Harsh.
Okay. Tina, I think I would encourage the private sector on ethical investing. It also refers to ESG as E for environmental sustainability, then S for social justice, how you can promote social justice, and then G for governance, organizational governance in terms of accountability and transparency. What that would do is in the long term, that would really help you, basically whether it is with regard to litigation, whether it is regard to any other activities, it will simplify that and it will ensure business sustainability. So that is one. The second is, as we do, engage in tripartite partnership. I think that is key. You cannot do it alone. Private sector also cannot do it alone. The other government also cannot do it alone. So ensure the government, civil societies, and companies get together and ensure that they work in tandem to provide assistance to the people and ensure that there is no harm in that. So this is where I think CBI network is very well placed in each of these countries, and they can certainly work with the networks. Thank you.
Thanks, Harsh. Trina?
Yes, I think I've mentioned it earlier. I think the first lesson is really just to simplify things so that you can attract more people to take on this agenda. And second is I would like also to invite everyone to be innovative in our project development. So we've been in this space for a very long time, and sometimes we stick with the programs that we think are appropriate or within our muscle memory. But sometimes, doing innovation within our project development can also lead to other programs, and one of which is also doing this framework, the conflict sensitivity one.
Thank you, Trina. Last but not least, Gregory.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I definitely would draw upon what we just heard from Trina and from Harsh, but I think my first lesson is really to talk to people, especially those you're seeking to assist. It's so often the case that women and youth, religious leaders, village elders, these local communities have vast amounts of information that are so specific and so important to understanding that contextual risk that I think every organization needs to understand. But also, I think just reach out to us, reach out to the international community, make sure that there are those opportunities to link up for joint analysis. And I think the second lesson is, and this goes back to what we just heard, especially from Harsh in terms of ESG, it's about thinking big. Conflict sensitivity is really about maximizing the benefits of our actions, and we're already usually operating along those lines. For example, we talk about strategies in the private sector that can yield profit as well as doing good for people and planet. And conflict sensitivity is just really about moving from risk aversion to something that yields an additional dividend, and that also starts with the P, and I'll end by saying it's peace. So it's just simply that that we need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Katrina, also for joining. I definitely want to get to the Q&A that we have now 3 questions in the Q&A box. We're kind of running out of time, but I'm hoping that our participants can stay with us for a few extra minutes so we can cover the questions. Katrina, actually, now that you joined us, I want to ask you. So there are 2 questions in the Q&A box. One is about whether conflict sensitivity should always be included in the planning phase, or if there is some criteria that can help people, organizations determine when it's needed, when it's not. And then maybe also the second question you can address, whether the private sector should tap into faith-based actors as resources for conflict prevention or maybe conflict sensitivity. Can you please reflect on those 2?
Sure. So an easy answer to the first one is, from a conflict sensitivity champion, would always say it's always good. But having said that, I say that most organizations have some kind of risk categorization, and in very high risk places, which is usually some history of tension, then it's definitely always required. And in lower risk places, then they say it's part of quality programming, but it may be less attention given to it. So obviously, I think that there are always benefits because it's about maximizing impact. So that's why I would like to follow what Gregory said. But obviously, it's absolutely essential in places where it's high risk. Because I know I need to be brief on the second point. I think it's a great question, and also it is a great opportunity. So I know that in a number of places, I mean, actually, interestingly, we have a number of faith-based partners who we're partnering with to integrate conflict sensitivity in their work, like Caritas in Burkina Faso. But what I found is also in more broader settings that conflict sensitivity itself can be a connector. So for example, it is in those cases, it has been a conversation with business actors and the faith-based actors and other faiths, so an interfaith dimension as to how to deliver aid in a conflict sensitive way. So I definitely think there is a great opportunity there, although it obviously is a challenging thing to manage in a conflict sensitive way, but it is also an opportunity for connection. And clearly, when it looks to connectors in society, obviously faith leaders often serve that function, but in very divided societies, it's got to be managed in an interfaith way as well.
Thanks, Katrina. That's very helpful. And thank you for also being brief. We have one more question in the Q&A box. If there are still any burning questions that the audience has, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box and we'll try to address them. Mainly also because this one is a very good question, but I don't want to leave with just this one because it focuses on the negative. So the question is, what have been some of the most negative impacts? What has happened, the worst examples that you can think of when failing to include conflict sensitivity in an intervention? So maybe I'll give the floor to Gregory to reflect on that. And I'm definitely hoping that we still get to finish on a more positive note.
Yeah, thank you. It's always, I think, important to end on a positive note, but I think that I can say that several of these well-known cases where there has been a severe or very adverse impact are also case studies that we now use in our community to learn from. And we've included those into the guidance note. And one that really stands out to me is the case of the tsunami and the aftermath of that, when we started to see exactly these kinds of distribution effects taking place in Aceh and a potential resumption of the conflict. And we know from many of these case studies that we've looked at that there has unfortunately been violent conflict and other misfortunes when things are not planned properly. So I don't want to spend too much on that, and I do encourage everyone to look through the guidance note when it's distributed and to share that widely, because we have learned a lot. But I think on the positive note, we know from those failures what's necessary now.
Thank you, Gregory. In the interest of time, I want to thank all of you, Hush, Trina, Gregory, and Katrina. for having joined the conversation, having presented your insights and the lessons learned. And as there are no more questions, I'm going to turn it over to Kareem and certainly hope that he's going to say something very positive and uplifting. So we don't think that this is negative or very difficult. But back to you, Kareem.
Well, thank you, Tina, and thank you, colleagues, for this really excellent panel discussion. I don't think it's a negative note at all, and I think that the positive and optimistic side of me is that we are, I think, really on the cusp of being able to show the way here and to show some good examples through CBI member networks and through other colleagues who have joined us as well. So, just as on a note of closing, I wanted to highlight that we've prepared these supporting materials and we'll be distributing them via email to all of the people who registered or attended today's session. So we have a guidance note and a case study on one of our CBI member networks, specifically PDRF, that are now available on the CBI website. The guidance note explains how conflict sensitivity is relevant to private sector disaster management and provides some very practical recommended actions for business networks to consider as they design and implement various interventions before, during, and after crises. The case study takes a closer look at how PDRF has been able to put conflict sensitivity in private sector disaster management into practice. So we will be sharing these materials, but more to the point, we really encourage all of you who've been able to join us today to reach out to the Connecting Business Initiative team. Our email address is connectingbusiness@un.org. We would be very pleased to work with you on putting some of these things that we've discussed today into practice. We'd also be very pleased to forward and connect you with our panelists today. So thank you again to everybody who's taken the time to join us. Thank you to our really excellent panelists and speakers. And I wish you all a very good day.